Hey there, and today we're going to talk about something from the project archives. So we're going to talk about one of my first projects, and since we just talked about provisional patents, we'll bring that in too. So the idea was, how can you make coffee that comes out of a coffee decanter, the style where you basically just pop it and pour it out into a cup. How can you make that have more of a crema on top like you get in an espresso? And so I had a coworker who was really into this. I actually didn't even drink coffee at the time, but ended up starting to drink it during this project and haven't stopped since. And we had to come up with a few different ideas. Basically, how can you froth something? And we had a few different methods, so I'm going to bring up some photos here. So the first method was to basically use a ultrasonic toothbrush. And by putting it in there and frothing it up, you ended up getting quite a bit of head on there, which is pretty impressive. But at the time, that was kind of a complicated method, so we actually thought about something a little bit more tried and true, which is, can we put a blender attachment on the end? So let's look at what I had here for, how do I rotate? Oh, I don't know. Either way, here we go. That's it. How do we add a blender attachment? So we had a motor and basically had a coupler and then a tiny little blender wheel on there like you get, on any frothing wand. And then a little screen at the bottom to screen out the bubbles to make them all a similar size. We found that if you didn't do that, you ended up with all sorts of bubbles, plus then the coffee came out too quickly. So all in all, we ended up creating this little guy, which isn't too big. It would fit right on the end of a decanter, and then, it could be lithium ion powered, although that wasn't really much of a thing back then. And overall, just make your regular drip coffee taste substantially better. And so, here it was on the end of a decanter that we had. And then, depending on the speeds that you'd have it blending at, it could make a pretty decent head on your coffee. It also cooled your coffee down substantially, made it easier to drink. So it was kind of a unique thing. This predated the Nespresso that kind of blended the Nespresso pot up. I forgot what that was called. But this was also back during the first to file days for patents. And so we really wanted to make sure we had lab notebooks that were signed and dated. Let's find, yep. So these are all in a lab notebook, signed, dated, and I would basically make sure that everything was, nice and tight in terms of IP at that time. But like I said in the provisional patent application, so what's the rest of the story with this? So this is where it gets into a more fun sort of story here in terms of lessons learned. So we had this idea, and so neither my friend nor I knew how to write up provisional patents. And so we knew one person who was pretty good at IP at the time and did it for the company he worked for. And so we paid him $3,000, and he wrote us up a provisional patent application. We still had to give him all the drawings and a lot of the words for it. And I think we even had to file it ourselves. And so I don't know what we really paid $3,000 for, but we did. And so then once we had our provisional patent filed, we thought, great, now let's go make some money. And so we go to the U.S. restaurant trade show, and all the restaurant equipment is there, and went and tried to basically talk with all these companies and see if they'd be interested in this. Turns out it wasn't really the right show. And also it turned out the partner I was with wasn't as much of a sales guy, the same as I'm not much of a sales guy. And so between the two of us, we basically ended up walking around the show and drinking a bunch of coffee. And granted, we spent another $3,000 going to the show. And so overall, this little project ended up going nowhere because of lack of sales experience and being able to sell the idea to the right company. If I were to do this again, what would I do differently? Well, there's a lot more options now in terms of you could, assuming there's something that you can patent and it doesn't infringe on anything. I haven't done a search in ages on it, but you could probably, again, put out a little decanter tip that's lithium ion powered, or what I actually wanted to do, if we look on this next page, was I wanted to make a funnel, if you guys can see this, where the motor's up top and you basically just pour your coffee through, and it has some baffles perhaps and maybe a filter, but you would stick it on top of your cup and you would just pour your coffee through and it would froth it up and make it, you know, a lot more fully bodied. So either way, that's the Crema funnel from the Startup Chuck archives, and hope you liked it.